In the summer of 1943, deep in the humid, suffocating jungles between Burma and southwest China, the men flying the treacherous air route known as the Hump believed they were on borrowed time. The mission was simple on paper, but deadly in reality. Transport fuel, ammunition, medicine, and emergency supplies from India to Kunming to keep China in the war against Japan. But on that particular afternoon, the mountains were cloaked in violent monsoon storms that swallowed entire aircraft without leaving the faintest trace. One C-47 crew, commanded by Lieutenant Robert Hayes, pushed through the storm until the aircraft's engines began to sputter. Lightning cracked across the sky, fuel gauges bounced crazily, and wind shear slammed the aircraft as if invisible fists were pummeling it from every direction. The pilots fought to keep altitude, but the storm was winning. The radio failed, the compass spun wild, and the horizon disappeared behind a wall of gray. When the engines finally coughed for the last time, the plane descended helplessly toward a jungle canopy so thick it looked like a solid green ocean. The crew braced for the impact they were certain would kill them. The crash was brutal. Trees ripped open the fuselage, metal screamed, and the aircraft shattered as it slid down a steep, muddy hillside. Somehow, miraculously, all 5 crewmen survived. Stunned and bleeding, they crawled out from the wreck, expecting Japanese patrols or wild animals to appear at any moment. The forest felt alive with danger. Every sound echoed, every shadow moved, and the dense humidity made breathing feel like drinking hot water. Their emergency maps were soaked, their rations ruined, and they had no idea if they were 5 miles or 50 miles from friendly territory. Lieutenant Hayes ordered everyone to gather whatever gear they could salvage, but aside from a few canteens, a flare gun, and a torn first aid kit, they had nothing. Night approached quickly, and with it came the sounds of insects and unseen creatures circling the wreck. The men huddled, exhausted, trying to keep their morale from collapsing. Hayes whispered to his co-pilot that they might not last more than a day or two without help. The jungle, he realized, would kill them even if the Japanese didn't. But fate had different plans. Early the next morning, the crew was startled by soft footsteps. Through the dripping leaves, figures emerged, a small group of barefoot Chinese villagers carrying woven baskets and long bamboo staffs. Their clothes were patched and worn, their hands calloused from years of work, and yet their expressions carried no fear, only curiosity and concern. At first, the Americans were terrified. They had heard stories of Japanese-controlled collaborators in the region. But the villagers approached slowly, speaking in gentle Mandarin, motioning for the crew not to be afraid. One elderly man stepped forward, knelt beside the injured radio man, and examined his wounds with surprising confidence. The villagers did not speak English, but they communicated through gestures, offering water, herbs, and strips of clean cloth. Hayes later recalled that moment as the first time he felt hope since the crash. The villagers belonged to a remote farming community that lived miles away from any major road. Their lives were simple: rice fields, bamboo huts, quiet rituals, and daily survival. Yet despite their modest existence, they were no strangers to war. Japanese patrols had moved through their region many times, burning homes, stealing crops, and punishing anyone suspected of helping the Chinese resistance. Still, these villagers had chosen compassion over fear. Rescuing crashed American crews had become an unspoken moral duty, even though it meant risking their own lives and the safety of their families. They knew the Americans were vital allies, and more importantly, they saw suffering humans who needed help. The villagers guided Hayes and his men through dense jungle trails that the pilots would never have found on their own. The terrain was unforgiving: slippery slopes, thorn-covered vines, leeches clinging to exposed skin. But the villagers moved with astonishing agility. They hacked through obstacles, lifted the wounded when they stumbled, and shared the little food they had. At one point, the group stopped to rest near a hidden stream. The villagers washed the Americans' wounds, applied urban poultices, and fanned them with broad banana leaves to keep insects away. Hayes watched them work and felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. These were not soldiers, doctors, or trained rescuers. They were farmers, people who lived quietly on the edges of war. Yet they treated the Americans with a level of care he had never expected from strangers. The journey took days. Every night they slept under makeshift shelters the villagers built from bamboo and palm fronds. The Americans listened as the villagers whispered to each other, alert for any sign of Japanese patrols. Once, near midnight, a distant shout echoed through the valley. The villagers instantly signaled silence, snuffed out their lantern, and covered the crew with branches and mud to camouflage them. A Japanese scouting unit passed so close that the Americans could hear boots crushing leaves. Not a single villager panicked. Their steady calm kept everyone alive. By the fourth day, the hills began to level out, and the villagers guided the crew onto a hidden dirt path used by Chinese resistance fighters. The Americans were weak from hunger and exhaustion, but they felt a surge of relief when they saw distant smoke from what appeared to be a small Chinese outpost. The villagers quickened their pace, waving reassuringly. At the outpost, Chinese guerrilla fighters welcomed the crew with warm tea and shouted orders to prepare medical supplies. The villagers bowed, preparing to slip away back into their jungles and fields, but Hayes wouldn't allow it. Despite the language barrier, he made them understand they had saved 5 lives, changed 5 futures, and shown a level of bravery the Americans would never forget. Before the villagers left, a young woman pressed a small handmade charm into Hayes's hand. It was carved from wood and shaped like a protective symbol meant to ward off danger. Hayes kept it with him for the rest of the war. Later, when he returned home, he used it as a reminder that kindness could be found in the most unexpected corners of the world, even in the middle of a global conflict. When the Americans finally reached Allied command, officers were stunned. Not only had Hayes and his men survived a crash that should have killed them, but they had done so thanks entirely to untrained villagers with no strategic incentive to help. The story quickly spread among transport crews flying the Hump. From then on, the phrase "the barefoot angels" became an informal nickname for the Chinese villagers who routinely guided lost or injured airmen out of the deadly jungle. Their quiet heroism, barely documented in official records, played a crucial but overlooked role in keeping Allied transport operations alive. Years after the war, historians studying the Hump recognized that thousands of American airmen owed their survival to local villagers who chose humanity over fear. These villagers received no medals, no headlines, and no global recognition. Their bravery lived only in the memories of the men they saved. Lieutenant Hayes, in his later years, wrote that the world often remembers generals, battles, and machines, but forgets the ordinary people who changed history through simple acts of courage. He believed that the barefoot villagers of Burma and China were among the greatest unsung heroes of World War II. Not because they carried weapons or delivered speeches, but because they protected life when they had every reason to turn away. In a war filled with destruction, their compassion became a reminder that even in the darkest places, humanity could still shine.